This is not just demographic decline. This is a catastrophic strategic blunder unfolding in slow motion. In his obsession with expanding westward toward NATO, Vladimir Putin is actively abandoning nearly 40% of Russia's vast territory, the Russian Far East, home to almost 8 million citizens. While Moscow pours blood and treasure into the war against Ukraine, entire regions like Chukotka and Magadan are turning into ghost towns under minus 40 degrees Celsius winters, failing logistics, and a halted Baikal-Amur mainline modernization. China is moving in with a silent multi-billion-dollar economic annexation, while North Korean workers toil under brutal conditions to mask the labor crisis. Putin is losing the East. Hit that subscribe button right now because this channel covers the real story, not the headlines, but the history being made underneath them as Russia's future slips away. When most people think about Russia's problems, they picture the battlefield in Ukraine, sanctions, or troop losses. And yes, those matter enormously. But underneath the Western Front lies something even more profound, the slow-motion unraveling of the Russian Far East. This immense territory, spanning millions of square kilometers rich in resources, is being hollowed out. Decades of neglect, accelerated by the war, have created a power vacuum that Beijing is quietly filling. You cannot sustain a great power when you abandon nearly half your landmass. The numbers paint a picture Moscow desperately wants to hide. The Russian Far East, covering about 40% of the country's territory with roughly 8 million people, has seen relentless depopulation. Regions like Chukotka and Magadan are bleeding residents. Harsh minus 40 degrees Celsius winters, crumbling infrastructure, and failing supply chains make life untenable. The critical Baikal-Amur mainline, BAM, that vital artery meant to unlock the East's potential, has seen its modernization stalled or postponed as resources flow west to the war. What was supposed to bind the region to the rest of Russia is instead a symbol of abandonment. Let me walk you through the logic step by step, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Putin's entire strategy has been built on one obsession: confrontation with the West. Every ruble, every soldier, every factory output funneled toward the NATO border and the meat grinder in Ukraine. The Far East, left to fend for itself. Soviet-era infrastructure decays. Young people flee to Moscow or abroad. Birth rates collapse. The result is ghost towns where entire settlements stand empty, reclaimed by the taiga. Logistics that once sustained mining, energy, and ports now fail under extreme cold and underinvestment. And into this vacuum steps China. Think about what this means for a regional administrator or resident in Vladivostok or Magadan right now. Your region was once a strategic outpost of Russian power in Asia. Now supply lines falter, jobs vanish, and Chinese economic influence grows through investments, supply chains, and even maps that quietly reference historical names. Your future feels tied more to Beijing than to Moscow. That is the psychological dimension of Putin's blunder, and it is every bit as important as the physical abandonment. To understand the full scale of this collapse, look at Russia's broader priorities. The war has drained the treasury and manpower. Modernization projects like BAM expansions, essential for connecting the Far East, are delayed due to funding shortages and redirected priorities. North Korean workers, thousands imported under harsh, near-gulag conditions, are brought in to fill labor gaps in construction and resource extraction. It is a confession of weakness, a supposed great power relying on one of the world's most isolated regimes to prop up its own territory. Russia is not disappearing overnight. The Kremlin still maintains formal control and can pour occasional resources eastward. But Putin needs time and focus to hold this vast empire together. His fixation on Ukraine robs him of both. The Far East is turning from an asset into a liability, costly to maintain, vulnerable to external influence, and demographically doomed. Now here is what makes this remarkable and dangerous for Moscow. China is not invading with tanks. It is conducting a patient economic annexation, billions in investments, creeping demographic expansion, dominance over local supply chains, and growing cultural and economic sway. Putin, who invaded Ukraine to secure borders, is losing control over actual Russian land through neglect. This abandonment sends a powerful message to the Russian people, especially those in the East. For families enduring brutal winters with failing services, watching their towns empty while Moscow obsesses over distant battles, this is proof that the center has forgotten the periphery. Their sacrifices and loyalty buy nothing. Morale and national cohesion erode when citizens see their homeland treated as disposable. On the home front in European Russia, the implications are corrosive. Putin sells a narrative of restored greatness and imperial expansion. But when 40% of the country is quietly drifting away, becoming economically dependent on China and demographically hollowed, the story phrase, Ordinary Russians see the gap between propaganda about strength and the reality of ghost towns and foreign workers. Authoritarian regimes fear visible proof that the empire is contracting. Internationally, this exposes Russia's weakness at a critical time. While Putin postures against NATO, China gains a junior partner increasingly reliant on Beijing for the East's survival. North Korea gains leverage through labor exports. The war in Ukraine, meant to project power, has instead accelerated Russia's internal fragmentation. It undercuts any claim to being a true Eurasian power. The effects are cumulative. Demographic collapse combines with infrastructure decay, stalled rail projects, labor shortages filled by foreign workers, and rising Chinese dominance. Each feeds the others. The Far East's ability to contribute to Russia's economy and security diminishes. Moscow's overextension in the West makes holding the East harder, creating a vicious cycle. I want to give the full picture. Russia retains formal sovereignty. Some investment trickles in. The region has resources that still matter. But the direction of travel is unmistakable. Putin's Western obsession is shattering Russia's future in the East. The price of this strategic myopia is a slow loss of territory not by conquest, but by self-inflicted collapse. For ordinary Russians in the Far East, families in fading towns, workers under extreme conditions, this is more than statistics. It is the end of a dream of development. It is proof that brute force abroad cannot substitute for competent governance at home. A region once envisioned as a Pacific powerhouse is learning the hard cost of imperial distraction. As we close this analysis, consider the broader arc. What began as a war for security in the West has become a driver of contraction in the East. Russia's three-day operation exposed military limits. Its resource allocation is now exposing geographic ones. The invincible Eurasian power is bleeding population, influence, and control in nearly half its land. The largest collapse in modern history is underway. Putin is losing 40% of Russia, not to armies, but to neglect, demographics, and China's patient advance. This represents real degradation of Russian strategic depth. It signals the hollowness of Moscow's ambitions. And it reminds everyone watching that empires die not always with a bang on the battlefield, but with a whimper in the forgotten frontiers. If this analysis helped you see the deeper fractures in Russia, share it with someone who needs the truth beneath the headlines. Hit subscribe for more breakdowns like this every time the map of power shifts. The East is emptying, the choke points are Chinese, and the ripples from this collapse will be felt in Moscow and beyond for decades to come. Stay with us.